This is an example of a chromatic grey colour wheel, which is made based on the 12 segment colour wheel and involves mixing the particular colour, say cadmium lemon, with its complementary opposite, the other side of the colour wheel. So the cadmium lemon is mixed with red violet to neutralise it, and the red violet is mixed with the cadmium lemon to neutralise it, and so on all the way around the colour wheel. So cadmium yellow is made grey by mixing with blue violet, and vice versa, so on all the way around. And this is another example of the colour wheel made with non-granulating pigments, which I did after this one, which I think the colours are a little bit more neutral. It's actually surprisingly hard to neutralise these bright colours, and it's very interesting. You get this sort of bias left in the colour wheel. I'm going to demo this still life painting, and to start with, for those of you who are not familiar or not used to, say, navigating, making a drawing from a photograph like this, I'll just very quickly, as quickly as I can, show you how you might go about that. First of all, I'm just going to make myself a little box within this wet stretched sheet. I'm going to reduce the length of the rectangle so that it matches more closely the image I'm going to be working from. And where shall I start? I think when you're wanting to place objects within a rectangle like this, working by eye rather than, you know, tracing it or something like that, one can look at how the objects relate to the edges of the picture space as the first guide. So this stool is quite usefully quite close to the bottom part of the picture space, and if I was to measure that with my pencil and my using my fingers to create that measurement across, it's quite useful. It's almost a third. So I can start by, say, measuring off almost a third here and almost a third there, and that's roughly where my stool will be, somewhere here. So I can start to suggest that shape, just very roughly, place it. And the height of the stool, again, I could use this pencil as a slide rule again, taking proportionately 1, 2, which is usefully the height of the jug actually in this still life photograph, so that's quite useful. 3.5. So that's a very useful pointer to how the proportions might pan out here. So let's just see if I can get 3.5. 2, 3. That's a bit too much. So making it a bit smaller. 2, 3.5. That's more like it. So it's going to be sort of about here, and then the top of the jug might come here, and so on. So at least I know where the base of the stool is going to be, roughly here. So it's a good way to just orientate yourself a little bit to start to place things. So the jug comes to about here. I can see that the spout overhangs on the left, comes over further than the stool. So that's a useful thing to notice. The base of it comes just quite close to the edge of the stool, and it doesn't take up as much as half. So maybe it comes to about here, something like that. We can put it in lightly and then adjust it later if we need to. Just hinted it there. And then we've got this tall vessel behind. And if you're doing a tall pot that's symmetrical, what you can usefully do is find out where the base of it is, say somewhere here, and where the top of it's going to be, roughly decide, and then take a vertical line down, which you can draw with a ruler very lightly because it's a construction line and you don't really want it to hang about in the painting. So you can use that as a guide for getting the vessel more or less symmetrical. So I'll just very quickly dash this in. There's a very useful negative space just here between these two pots, and if you check on the shape of that, you can that will help you get the shapes of the two vessels. So spaces between things, which we like to call negative spaces, are very useful when you're trying to draw by eye. See here, there's another negative space inside this handle. So if you try to draw the space itself, you end up drawing the handle. So that's a useful way to try to understand the shape. Okay, so there's a little bit of an edge here coming down to the angle, and there's a lovely bit of fabric hanging draped, something like that. My shape is still a little bit too wide, but not to worry. And then there are some other odd shapes, so I can put those in with my brush. Okay, so mixing the colours. I think I'm going to start with putting in some large areas of colour, so I can find my way into the painting that way. So I've got my water here, and a selection of brushes. I'm using a big one, 16 round, to start this ball rolling, as it were. I fancy a kind of a pinkish grey. I'm just going to consult my colour wheel, and I fancy something like this, which is alizarin crimson grey. So alizarin crimson grey is mixed with yellow green, and then I can thin it right down and get something quite pale. But I'm starting with alizarin crimson. Mix my alizarin crimson grey, so it's a yellow green. So the yellow I used was lemon yellow, and the blue was cerulean. So I'm gradually adding more of that to get a neutralised alizarin crimson. So it's quite useful to try these colours out on a bit of paper. Just reach for a little bit here and see what we've got. Okay, that's quite a neutral pinkish grey, and I think it's neutral enough. I'm going to go with it, but I'm going to thin it down as well. So I've got quite a bit on my brush here. It's being number 16, it holds quite a bit. So I'm just going to thin down what I've got on my brush to start with, and I'm going to start with that. Popping it in quite quickly here as an underpainting, and I'm going to turn my board a little bit so that I can get my brush, the tip of my brush. I'm working in a small space, so I have to a bit like cordon bleu cookery. I have to get my the tip of my brush against the line to control where the colour really goes. So because I'm working from a photo, and I'm working flat, I can, on a small board, I'm able to do that. So not forgetting the negative space. And then that drape carries on, doesn't it, down underneath the stool. And I've just got enough of that mix to finish that surface. So I've just put a very thin wash on to start with. Not quite invisible, but certainly quite thin. And now I've got more of this mix here, the original mix, and I'm going to try it out in the darkest places just to see what I've got. Just pop it in, wet into wet, and just spreading a little bit of shade under the stool and this side as well, where I see the wrinkles on the folds of the drapery. I can add some of this colour. So because the surface is wet, the paint will flow and move in that, and that's what I want. I want a sort of soft, fabricy look to the shadow. And this colour that I've mixed is separating. Cerulean is a granulating colour, and so I've got some granulation, some separation happening there. I'm just going to mix a little bit more of this neutrally pink with these colours, and add just a little bit more shade here and there. A bit more dramatic. So you can see whilst it's wet, you can do quite a bit and work the colour into the surface. And it's best not to fuss and fiddle with it too much, just to sort of put it in whilst it's damp and then just accept what happens with it, because we can always go over it a little bit with something else later on if we need to. Let's get that negative space in there. It will be quite important because the jug is quite pale, so the surfaces around it will help to define the jug. This is all quite rough here because I'm just trying to paint quite quickly, just to show you how some colour mixes might happen. Okay, I think while that's drying, I'm just going to do something here, and I might just choose something more from a different part of the chromatic colour wheel. Maybe I'll go for something like a yellow-orange grey. So I have to mix my yellow-orange first, and then I add ultramarine to it. So my yellow-orange is mixed with cadmium yellow and cadmium red light, airing on the side of the yellow to get the yellow-orange. And then I'm going to add a little bit of ultramarine to that, going quite carefully, just to cool it down so that it's nice and has a soft, neutral grey appearance. Okay, that's pretty grey. Now I can try that on my test sheet. Yeah, there we go. That's pretty grey, but it still has a slightly orangey appearance. And because I only want it, again, very pale, I'm thinning it right down. I'm just using what I've got on my brush, and I'm just going to pop that in. Because my first wash is still wet, I'm just going to leave a little edge there so it doesn't bleed in together. And although I've neutralised the yellow orange quite a bit, it's still a distinctly different colour from the first wash that I put on. So just leave that to go around in a minute. So I'll do bits and pieces later, but basically that will be it for that shape. Okay, I think I'm going to have to use my hairdryer now, so I better just go and fetch it. I might change now to a smaller brush, like 12 perhaps, and let's see how we go with this pot behind. I fancy it might be a kind of a yellowy pot. I think maybe I've used the yellow orange. I could use some yellow Hansa. I've got Hansa yellow here, which I've got in my paints here. But it's a warm yellow, so I can use a warm yellow and neutralise it with blue violet. And if you haven't done your chromatic colour wheel, don't worry, because you can use your 12 segment, your original colour wheel, just to check which you have to mix. So, mix yellow. Violet. I've used a little bit too much of the red there, so I'm going to add some more of the yellow and more of the blue, just to get that neutralised. Let's see how I'm doing. Okay, that might not be too bad. It's quite a sort of warm browny gold. Let's see, I could neutralise it a little bit more, but I think I'll start with that. It's pretty neutralised. So there's light and shade on this pot as well, so you need to consider that before too much longer. But I'm just going to put this pot in this colour, and because the photograph's black and white, you don't have to follow these colours. You can choose your own preferred versions. Maybe you think it's a green pot, in which case, how do you neutralise strong green, etc. So pop this in, and not forgetting the little negative space. And either I can, whilst it's damp, I can darken this shape with more of the same whilst it's damp, or I could put in a different grey, mixing a colder grey or something like that to put down the side here. Because I'm just doing this quickly to show you, I'll just use what I've got. Okay, so well, let's have a look at the little stool, which I think is probably, a red violet grey. That would be rather nice. So let's try red violet grey, and I make that by neutralising my red violet with lemon yellow. So I'll get out the lemon yellow, and the red violet is made with alizarin crimson. Again, the same colours. It's all about proportions. And the ultramarine blue. So we'll neutralise that red violet. Okay. That looks like a pretty neutralised red violet. Just going to mix a little bit more of it because I should have a bit more pigment, I think. Okay, let's try that. So there's a really nicely neutralised red violet there. I'm going to go for it. It's still a bit wet, so obviously you'll be able to wait a little bit, it'll get the hairdryer out. I'm going to just try to avoid it with a little bit of light left between the two objects. And I'm just going to quickly block this in. Obviously you could take a little bit more time. You might see light and shade on the spool and other different features on it, and you might want to use a different shade of grey from one side to the other as well. So you can think in more detail about this, the principles that I'm showing you today with this demo. So just carved edge, and that's all wet still. Now I could dry that, and then wet on dry I could add more colour or linear pattern, whatever. But as I'm doing a quick demo today, I'm just going to sort of hint at the shapes with a little bit more wet into wet work. I hope that will suffice. A bit of shadow there as well. And I'm getting quite a nice palette of greys here, so there's nothing to stop me going back and using one of these, a cooler grey perhaps, to hint at shadow around the pots, something like that. So that's also something one can do. Now that's quite wet, so I'm going to quickly use my hairdryer. So that leaves me with this white pot. At least I'm assuming it's white, perhaps it's pale yellow or pink or something, but I'm going to let it be white with some delicate patterning on it. And I can please myself, I can use other colours, or I can use some of the ones I've already got here. So I'm just going to use this neutralised grey-green to suggest these flowers here. Obviously, if you want the shine, you can work around those little bits of shine. Just brush this in, so it won't take too much time. And then I'm going to mix a nice dark neutralised colour, which I think might neutralise ultramarine blue. So ultramarine blue. Neutralised by a yellow orange. So here's my ultramarine blue, nice and pigment rich, and a little bit of the yellow orange mix in it. Rich than that. Somebody, last week, somebody asked me how you mix a black, which was a very interesting question. You mix a black by choosing two really, really dark opposing pigments, a really dark red, like alizarin crimson, and a really dark green, hooker's green perhaps, or viridian, or maybe phthalocyanine green. You mix those two and get the balance right, because a really wonderful black. But that's a really wonderful dark grey there, mixed from ultramarine and yellow orange. And I'm just going to quickly pop in the pattern here with that, just to suggest a little bit of dark contrast. I'm doing it very quickly, but obviously you can take a lot more time. You have a couple of hours. And there's a little bit of edging here, which I'm going to transfer with the tip of my very big brush. Now there's a lot more contrast and detail and so on, and with this dark grey, I could add a few more touches of detail. There's the back of another little foot there behind the stool, and also now that it's all dry, I can add more wet on dry layers of colour to this. So again, I'll just show you with this colour that I have to have on my brush. But if I wanted to, say, deepen shadows underneath or cool down this shadow here, perhaps on this pot, I could do it with this lovely neutralised ultramarine grey. Let's just pop in a few other things. There's some little bits of patterning going down here and going down here. So you can dash in some details before I call it finished. Okay, I'm going to leave it there. It's a little bit rough, but it gives you an idea.